All right.
Oh, oh, how whimsical. Thank you. Very good. Okay, let's continue. I said this was going to be scary, and it's not that
That's not
scary. It's
scary
not
yet.
scary at all.
A little bit.
For you, my wife, you get it. Yeah, I got it. Mm. Okay.
But for those of you who are new, um, you just got a taste of, while we're going to cover some really interesting information, it's really the crux of it. The point of it's not acquiring interesting information about Halloween, it's about being awake as a consciousness. And the consciousness is the only thing that can apprehend or comprehend any information coming our way. So that practice that we just did is a great example of
That we're still doing.
that we're still doing, but the guided practice that we're continuing is just a great example of how do we approach learning? How do we approach knowing? How do we approach knowledge? How do we approach life? And so Gnosis can translate as direct experiential knowing, sometimes referred to as mystical, but more so direct experiential conscious and intuitive knowing or knowledge. So we're not here to give, and therefore, we're not really here to receive information. As fun and fascinating as the information about Halloween is, we're really here to awaken as a consciousness that then all the impressions coming in from life, this class, what's going to happen afterwards, tomorrow, then becomes nourishment for the soul. Yeah.
Okay, so here's our exercise, our practice, our experiment. Let's maintain this attention with awareness within awareness. Is that good enough to say, or is that just too ridiculous?
I think it's great.
Subject, wow. Again, if I get that kind of affirmation from my wife, then it's like, okay, you'll be hearing more of it. Okay. Subject, you're aware of yourself. And what happens is we're going to bounce back and forth for a little bit till we find our feet in this. And eventually it becomes a way that we pay attention whenever we remember to pay attention. That part of our attention, or our attention, is focused on the object that we're doing, in this case, listening, watching. I'm holding a little pen, a stylus, and I'm aware of that. The objects that I have in my hand, the objects that I'm attentive to, the objective of what I'm doing, my attention, maintaining the awareness of myself as I'm doing it. You might notice, oh, I'm here. I'm here. Oh, I'm out there. I heard a sound, so I'm in the location. Continue when we feel a pull from outside, as if that is a sound that draws our attention. Try not to let our attention be completely captivated by it, but include it into our awareness. It's part of the location where I am. I'm still keeping my attention and awareness to myself. Now, if you do this, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I didn't know this when I was younger, but I did when I was older, younger, still younger. I was pretty young. I was in an apprenticeship and working and studying Gnosis and kids and wife, very intense. But I was studying Gnosis fundamentally and learning how to pay attention. And I found that the use of the consciousness, though at first it seems like a stretch and it makes it difficult to pay attention because I'm not used to it. But once you start to pay attention with the consciousness like we're doing, you'll notice that later on, when you need to remember something, you just think for a moment and it comes as a flash. So here we are. You're doing attention with awareness within the location. Keep that. I'm not sure how to spell it. It just came to my mind. I just wrote a word. See yourself seeing the word. I don't think that's right, but it doesn't matter because the exercise will work. It's not about grammar, though it's always a little bit about grammar. Spelling is grammar, right? Okay. You may say, what was it? What was the exercise? Well, we're going to later get a follow-up email and you'll ask yourself, what was it that I just wrote on the board? I'm not going to expand upon it. Are you going to spell check me? Is that what you're doing? No. Okay. All right, let's continue on. Let's try to maintain attention with awareness. This is an image, and now I just realized, and a lot of these images now I'm using, they are AI generated. And one of the things that you see in a cool AI generated image is it's usually got a flaw or two. And I just noticed he's got 6 fingers. 7 fingers, actually. Maybe that's intentional. Maybe that's art. I don't know. Anyway, I added to the image and I put the butterfly there. This is an example of what are the twins, though they don't look completely alike, of thanatos and hypnos. In Greek, death and sleep. And throughout many different traditions, death and sleep are linked together. That's why in Gnosis, the means by which we awaken helps to free us from death. As a matter of fact, if we've read any of the Gnostic Gospels, or if you've read the Gospel of Thomas, this is probably maybe one of the most popular Gnostic Gospels, the very first phrase, each one has a number, and it says, I don't have any notes, so I'm just going to pull it out, but it says, the one who interprets the meanings of these words will not taste death. That's the opening phrase. You want to read that, right? Mm-hmm. Like, hey, yeah. There's something else, line 56, it says, he who has found in the world a corpse has become superior to the world. The physical world, the physical life that we're living in, that we relate to life and death, really is a small fraction of creation. And creation expands out from nothingness, the no thingness, and we're going to cover this in our correspondence group soon in Kabbalah teachings, but it expands outwards. That expansion, what is that expansion? In Kabbalah, it's called the Ein Sof or the limitless light. It's light that has never been created or manifested. It's light that we can't see with the physical eyes. And it's far beyond the creation of the universe that we are aware of, but it relates directly to that principle of Christ. Light is Christ. It's not a person or a place or a thing, because it is everything. And that by that very nature, it makes it no thing. But it's not nothing, it's just no thing, because it is everything. It goes beyond the concepts of the ideas, and the stories of the Gospels and other teachings are helping us to apprehend with the mind, to make sense of something that goes beyond the senses. But why I want to talk about this briefly, this expansion of creation of light, which is Christ, that gives life to everything, but it comes from outside of creation, is because often when we think of life, we think of death, and in many times in these teachings, and we do cover this eventually, that this idea of past lives, and we might have some memories of past lives. And because if the soul is eternal, that means that it's going through a process, and why the butterfly is associated with that, because the process of the butterfly, which has the same root of the word psyche, which is the same word for soul, which we've talked about, and that this butterfly relates to Thanatos, death, because Physical life's an inversion or a indirect proportion to the soul. And it's actually this attachment through the ego craving to hold on to life that does not allow the soul to be free. Now you might think, wow, do I have to lose my life to experience afterlife or the soul? No. The preparation that we've mentioned is preparing ourselves to let go of this physical form, because the one thing we know about this physical world is that it's going to go away. Whatever there is here and now eventually will be something else. It'll transform into something else. And so that's why the butterfly related to death has a relationship of the soul and transformation. And so we have this idea many times that we've lived before, because it just makes wonderful sense. And we can verify this as we begin to awaken our consciousness here and now. We may start to have experiences of past lives, and they may become a real reality for us. But what's very interesting is when we talk about past lives, we don't realize at the same time we're talking about past deaths. If we've lived before and we're living now, that it means we have died. But we don't have that memory of that process in our brain because we're so accustomed to this physical reality that this physical understanding cannot understand death. It doesn't experience death because, and even science says that, when you go, there's nothing left. Science has said we've already determined everything that there is. Bad news, guys, there is no soul. There is nothing that lives after the body. It just goes away. We know that. Gnosis says, I don't think you do. I don't think you do, because all of your faith and study is only in matter. And matter is just a small part of life. And life is just one side of death. And that the soul, just like the symbol of eternity, the serpent that bites its tail in a continual circle, means that the beginning, was this the tail? This was the tail. The end and the beginning are always at the same point, which also means, and this is another great piece of knowledge for us to learn to apply, is that means that any problem is simultaneously present with its solution. When we are able to leave with our mind beyond the physical world, we start to get into a realm where we can comprehend problem and solution, and not see things as problems, but just see them as elements that we then comprehend. Okay. So, we've lived before, possibly. You don't have to accept or reject. Here's the beauty of Gnosis and the teachings that Master Samael gives. There's hundreds, thousands of talks, over 70 books, and millions of claims and practices and teachings that are put forth. But what I think is the most important and powerful for all of us, that ranges from past civilizations, future civilizations, subterranean existence, superior dimensions, extraterrestrial life, all of these things, very, 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 very fascinating and amazing. Probably the most fascinating, amazing thing is that everything that's being taught is 100% verifiable. We need only the techniques and the will, the longing to experience them with consistency and continuity, which takes us to the point, the precipice of what death has become for us. With all of our faith in the physical world, we're not able to maintain consistency and continuity through the consciousness of the soul. We're continually subject to birth, death, and all of the information left in the physical brain is going to die with the physical brain. We have to find a way, like this exercise that we did, to allow the information to pass into a state beyond the formation that we received it. That's what we call gnosis, or knowledge. Normally what we receive is knowledge in a formation or information. And the key to unlocking that is the consciousness itself. And so it might feel like what's going on here while I'm paying attention, nothing's happening, but we have to try to create a thread of consistency and continuity, which develops a faith in consciousness itself. And then it will yield fruits for ourselves. So as I said, that Christ is that element that gives all life, and it's sacrificed so much for us to be here. One of the greatest sacrifices I think that it does, as it manifests through anything that has life at all, it subjects itself also to death. And that Christ and that Christic principle does not die, but it experiences life and death through the element that it inhabits. And the more conscious we become of that process and that Christ inside of ourselves, the more we liberate the potential of what the Christ actually has to offer us. Not just a physical life to be born and die, not just the opportunity to have a physical sensation that's pleasant or unpleasant and try to get more pleasant sensations and away from unpleasant sensations, but get to the very source, the truth of all creation, and define purpose. As I said, death, if we're conscious and working, can provide a real sense of why we're here and where we're going. And fundamentally, that allows us to find a purpose, our purpose. To know, can you imagine? Maybe you've touched on it. To feel that in a particular point in time and moment, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. You know how joyful that is? And sometimes we feel that joy and we think it's this thing, but really it's the soul fulfilling its purpose in relation to creation. Okay. So, death and sleep related together.
And Brendan, sorry about the Wichita spelling.
Oh, yeah. Hey, don't help them remember.
He's in that part of the country.
I've never written it before. Forgive me.
It was Halloweenish. It was a Halloweenish Wichita.
That's going to be even better if you remember how I spelt it, because that's the test of the consciousness.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, so what death provides is an end to suffering. Because all physical elements go through the process of transformation. They develop and they decay. And death is the conclusion of that decadence. Passing from the suffering that takes place in this physical world. And that's going to be interesting, because I'm going to tell you a very fun little story about that. But when we think of death, as I said, we think of death of the physical. But there's actually 3 different but related deaths. We're only going to talk about 2 of them. We'll go deeper in other classes. The first is what we've related to is physical death, which is the disintegration of the values from the physical body. Because you, I, we are a sum total of values, qualities. And those qualities have given us the formation of the body that we have and the life that we live. All of physical reality is, and let's see if we can, tree of life, little tree of life. I'm not going to go deep into the tree of life right now, but what I do want to show is this sphere here at the bottom, Malkuth, or the kingdom, represents the physical world. And from that point up, life gets more complex as far as dimensions, But the more dimensions there are, there's the more freedom for reality or the soul to express. Inversely, as it descends, life becomes more dense and complicated till it reaches the physical world, where the physical world is the most complicated from the form of creation that matter gets on its own. The third type of death, which we'll talk about, goes deeper into what happens after that complication, because matter can be more complicated, but that's done through our self-will to perpetuate something that actually proposes and does the opposite. Now, this Christic light comes from infinite abstract space and condenses. As I said, that it's a great sacrifice to give life. It has to limit itself. And as it limits, it takes forms and it condenses. And that light, when it hits what is called the astral plane, which is this astral and mental plane, becomes symbols, which we equate as thoughts and ideas and feelings
And images.
and images. And in the Gospel of Philip, it says that the truth came into creation, but came clothed as a symbol. Because it's so vast that it cannot be contained in our mind. It has to be separated into different images and symbols. But as that light condenses down into it touches the physical, it begins as micro elements, atoms, molecules, cells, and then matter complicates and builds out from infinitely small. That you and I, all of us began as two particles barely perceptible in the womb of our mother, masculine and feminine principles. And then eventually that matter complicates. The symbol of the tree is used because you can see a seed that dies in the physical world to be born as a tree, and it starts as a minute particle and then it grows out. And that's so beautiful that you can cut into a tree. Maybe that's not beautiful for the tree, but you can cut into the tree and see the rings of the tree and see how long it's lived by how much the matter is complicated and expanded outwards. But all life is doing that, which tells us that this physical world, trying to find true purpose or the cause of life, is impossible, because all of this physical world is just a consequence of something beyond it. Everything in this world is just a consequence of something that we're not conscious of, which is why life is so confusing for us as people, and why we spend so much time trying to find peace and happiness, but we can't really find it in the physical world if our psychological state, our consciousness, is not experiencing that peace and happiness. Now, in this, we have what's the tree of life, but within the center of what is called the tree of life is the tree of knowledge. That word knowledge in Hebrew is dot. In Greek, it's gnosis. That this tree of knowledge, and if we know our Bible a little bit, you might understand that the tree of life was in the Garden of Eden. Eden's a Hebrew word for pleasure, for peace, and that we, through our identification with trying to increase sensual pleasure, we left the state that was here in the fourth dimension and descended down into the physical world. And the story, whether you know it or not, I'm going to convey this. It's a little known fact, not talked about very often, could be controversial. But what happened at the very beginning of that Bible is that we ate this fruit as a humanity of the tree of knowledge, Gnosis, and we died as a consequence. So everything that we're living now, from the spiritual point of view, is related to death, because this physical world did not exist as it does now. It existed in combination with its vital force, and we separated the vital force, which is the principle of life, from the physical world. And we could see it like this veil that they talk about in Halloween. This time the veil's very thin, but the veil's always thin. And what happened in a simplistic way of expressing it, as a humanity, as an individual, we pushed on the veil, which was into density, into sensation, and we felt the sensation, and we kept pushing, and we kept pushing until all of a sudden, boink, we were outside. We were outside of the creation that was given to us. And we got fascinated with what was going on, so much so that we lost contact with where we were. And so in the tradition, it's said that humanity ate from the tree of knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil, the science of the knowledge of good and evil, meaning we experienced sensation, good, and equated them as good or evil, apart from our own understanding. We separated ourselves from the divine reality and saw it just as my reality, my sensation. And what happens is we got put to sleep between good, evil, right, wrong, me, you, us, them, my beliefs, their beliefs. And what crystallized in that was what was called the animal mind, or the egoic mind, or the self-centered mind, which in the Hebrew esotericism is called Cain, or Cain. And so what happened was we became fascinated and profoundly asleep. So you see that sleep and death are completely related. And we became trapped in hypnosis. And hypnos is the name of the god of sleep. Hypnotized to the pursuit of trying to find pleasure outside of ourselves. Because the reality, and what Gnosis comes to teach us, is that this Eden, this pleasure, this joy is actually inside of us. But we got fascinated with the world outside of us, and thousands and thousands and millions of years, we've been pursuing as a humanity, trying to find something that we already had, but didn't realize it was inside of us. So we continue to pursue comfort and peace and joy outside of us through possessions and through all sorts of elements. And we've become hypnotized, or under a state of hypnosis, between good and evil. And this is the esoteric interpretation of this relationship of what is called the fall. It's a fall into a sub-reality, a sub-consciousness, meaning my consciousness is subjected to following good sensations and bad sensations. And that's scientifically what it all reduces down to, is this relationship of sensations. And we became separated from the eternal living tree. And we're all free to return, but we don't know where it is. We don't know how to find it. We don't know how to come back to it. And so this brings us to this story that I want to tell about this god that is Morpheus. And Morpheus is not just the individual from the Matrix, but he was named after this character Morpheus, who was the son of one of these brothers, these twin brothers, Death and Sleep. Morpheus is the son of Hypnos, the son of sleep. Morpheus is the father of dreams. He had two brothers, and one produced the dreams of inanimate objects, images and symbols of inanimate objects, the other one of animals, and Morpheus of people. But really, we could say that Morpheus is the presenter of dreams. And dreaming is one of the main characteristics of sleep. And the Gnostic esoteric teachings tell us that you and I are profoundly asleep. We're continually hypnotized with our experience, our sensations, and so we've forgotten our divine nature. And even though then our spirituality itself becomes hijacked by this pursuit of material spirituality, when spirituality has little to do with this physical reality, especially if we're not conscious of the spiritual reality. So we have to begin by dividing our attention to find, at first, trying to find comfort in that uncomfortable state of what's going on here. Seems like nothing's happening, because I need to detach myself more or less from my senses and sensual life to some degree so that I can have the possibility of experiencing this divine state, this divine potential that is here in every given moment. And this relationship of this god Morpheus is related to the poppy, which was a sacred plant that was made, it's been through here throughout time, like many other sacred plants, to help us reconnect to our inner world or our inner life. But it's very interesting because it's become sort of a drug, yes, but sort of a great symbol of the sleep of humanity. So here's what's so interesting that the Gnostic teachings tell us, and you can find this in other teachings, and part of the teachings go into humanities that are much older than we believe, that go beyond the physical material understanding of humanities. And we'll go into that in other classes. But for a moment, let's just put that as, okay, well, let's say that there was another humanity. We could call that humanity Atlantis. Let's say that there was a humanity even before that when we were in complete connection with divine, and that's where we fell. So far back in the distant past of the human experience that we've really lost touch. And everything else has been a further complication of matter and materialism, so far that we can't even conceive of what a spiritual life is really like from that point of view. Because we're so connected to our mind, and our mind is so connected to the sensual world and intellectual processing, making sense of things, that we've lost the capacity to perceive beyond the senses. And at the end of that last humanity, that last race, a new race was beginning, and there was an exploration being done in the planet, trying to determine what's of use, what can be used, all of these types of things. And there were two great beings that were actually doctors at the time, scientists, that went out and they did an extreme study on the poppy. And they found that there were 49 different components or constituents of the poppy itself, and that poppy relates directly to the subconsciousness of the human being. And so in order to stay awake, it was really important to understand how we slept. So there was rituals done with the poppy to help to understand how this operated. Now, there was a science that existed prior to the science that we know now, and it incorporated spiritual values, and it had the capacity, among other things, to transform elements with light and sound, and that there was an ability to shine light into the aura of these plants and transform and materialize these different subconscious regions. There was also different techniques and tools that were used in ancient Tibet, for lack of a better word, we'll say in ancient Asia, where this humanity began from a Gnostic point of view. And there was a great instrument that had 49 strings, and that the beings would sit around and try to understand, because let's begin to understand this relationship of sleep. What happens when we fall asleep and dreams, and why dreams are so connected, is when we're not paying attention, like I know we're still doing, right? Attention with awareness within awareness. And in that, there's nothing else going on But what happens is if I get identified, you hear something that gets you excited and you're thinking, but you're not attentive to your thought process, that's a dream. If you're doing something, tapping, fidgeting, and you're not aware of that physical undertaking, that is a dream in the physical body. That's why we sleep at night, is because we're trying to unravel and reprocess all of the subjective subconsciousness that we've gone through the day, because we're receiving information all of the time. And because we're not awake consciously, we're not converting the information into knowledge. And it just fills us and fills us. And so in the ancient times, they would use meditation and sound, vibration, frequency to connect, as well as the poppy, to connect, to find, oh, at 3 o'clock this afternoon, I was engaged in an argument and I trapped part of my consciousness subject to these different regions in my psyche. So that they would play the notes as a group, focus together, and penetrate into the deeper levels of the subconsciousness to go in and take back the elements of themselves that they left there, that were dreaming in these subconscious regions, because dreams are happening right now in all of these subconscious regions. And some of those dreams are terrifying and terrible, so terrifying and terrible that they've been suppressed down in the depths of our consciousness. Because if we see that tree of life, it has a reflection, which is a potential. It's a means by which to process, like death processes information that vibrates slower than the senses can perceive. When we get identified or fall asleep or hypnotized and process information unconsciously or through desire, trying to grab onto something, we actually take the light of Christ and subcreate it in a reflected region in our own psyche. And it's inverted and it's going through that process. Hey, I'm Jeff doing such and such unconsciously down inside of myself, which is why it's almost impossible for us to have real deep peace, because in these 49 subconscious regions of ourself, we're living multiple lives in parallel dimensions of our own psyche. And we can experience this as we begin to awaken, and we teach in Gnosis, is to go down in there. Because anything that you see in this world, anything that anybody has that's super beautiful or amazing, any quality, it also is in potential inside of you. But also, anything that you might see that's disgusting, despicable, upsetting, grotesque, violent, that you can perceive outside of yourself, that potential is inside of you. And in many cases, it's actualized. How do we know that? Because for those of us that have been studying revolutionary psychology, what's the first pages go on to say? That the exterior is a reflection of our interior. So this is where it gets a little scary. What's happening outside in this world that we might feel disgusted by and that I'm not a part of it, it's intimately related to us. That's why we're here, and why we're never going to be able to solve the energy crisis, the climate problems, the drug problems, the poverty problems. None of those things are going to be able to be solved in the physical world alone, because that is a consequence, and it's a consequence of the way we think, feel, and act as a humanity. And the way that we try to solve those things are also under the same power of hypnosis, because we're trying to continually produce comfort and find peace outside of ourselves, which is a fine pursuit. But if we're not dividing our attention and trying to find it inside of ourselves, like they were working with the different levels of the psychology of the mind, what happens is we've began to populate and repopulate all of these dark desires that we don't want to feel about ourselves. We repress them and send them down inside if we're not conscious. And so the potential in which people say, well, why, how could there be evil in the world? Well, evil was just a possibility, because if there's a possibility to do this great thing, there has to be the antithesis of not doing that, or the opposite of that. And it doesn't mean that we're always going to be doing it physically. Some people will, but it's a potential. And that our disgust of that very thing actually fuses parts of our psyche in these subregions of our own consciousness. And it's very interesting to understand this relationship. So, what time is it? Oh, yeah. Do we have to take a break? Let's make a little break. We did a practice, so let's take a little break. Calm down. Don't get all excited. Take it easy.
I'm going to try to take like 4 minutes.
Yeah, stretch, a bio break if necessary.
So 20 past.
Stretch.
We'll resume. Yeah.
Keep your attention on what you're doing.
Awareness.
Your awareness, and we'll come right back. So Sisyphus was a king. The name Sisyphus has two possible interpretations. Sisis or Sophos, wisdom, and Sisis, goat skin. Interestingly, because goat skin, and I just want to remind everybody why we're talking about death, because it's an element associated with Halloween. So it is a Halloween class, but we're just not talking about trick-or-treating or candy, because I heard talking about candy. Oh, that was another slide I was going to show anyway. Well, we're not going to do it. Or pumpkins. We talked about pumpkins for a little bit. But death is very important in how it relates for us here and now, because there's a second aspect of death. I talked about the first, which is physical. And the second is what we call psychological death or mystical death. And that instrument that they were working with was a means by which they were able to go back into their psyches and die, or psychologically kill the formation that trapped part of their soul. And this essence that we say essence is fractions of the soul. And remind me, somebody, we're going to talk about that at the end. But I want to tell this little story here about King Sisyphus. And I'm going to give a condensed version. But what's wonderful about these, I think, the mythologies, because mythologies, legends, but legends generally become mythologies, which become spiritual teachings, religious teachings, sacred writings, because they have a psychological component, which is, again, as I said, for some of you who've heard, psyche, which is the word for root for butterfly, but it means soul. And logos, which we associate with the study of or understanding, which we get the root logic. Psychology is a combination of the divine intelligence, the divine logic, or the logos, and the soul. And the relationship that we are connected to the logos, or that divine or divinity inside of us, and the relationship that the soul is tied to the physical world, which separates us from that divine intelligence, and why death is necessary to free the soul from its continuous cycles of life and death, so that it can feel that we have the potential and the possibility to feel the divine reality apart from, at least for a little while, apart from our identification complete with the physical. But because the physical life is a result, and parts of our soul have been trapped in these abysmal layers of our own psyche, the soul is tied like to a stone, like Prometheus, going over and over back to this physical world until we free all these parts. But the thing is, most of us don't even realize that that's what's going on. And we think that, oh, I'm going to do good things and come back as a butterfly, maybe, or whatever. So there's a science to the way that the the metamorphosis of the soul and the transmigration of the souls. It's a science. It's not just a happenstance element. And so it takes time to really understand this inside of ourselves. And this is just an introduction to this relationship and the necessity to understand this second part or second phase of death, which we call psychological death or mystical death, which is the conscious extraction of our essential self from the psychological structures that they've been trapped in. And there's many allegories for that. And fundamentally, almost every mythology and spiritual teaching has at its central point that relationship. Good to know. I think it's very good to know, very practical. Then, and a great movie, which I advise you to watch, it's called After Death. And it tells the story of first count near-death experiences in a very new and current movie format, which is very impactful. But many things that happen when people have these near-death experiences is they come in contact with this divine reality for the first time in their memory, and it transforms them so amazing. Then they come back to the physical world and they can't actually integrate it into the life, into the world. They don't have the capacities to live the life that they felt they were meant to live. And so there's a struggle in that, but it impacts the consciousness. And for the Gnostic, it's not that there is an afterlife. The point is that we need to contact that while we're alive in a way that is usable and accessible. It's not that there is a heaven or a hell or a belief in a heaven and a hell, but to know that and know how the didactic operates to be part of the heavenly realms and to free ourselves from the dark realms. But we have to do it through working with our consciousness. And so that's why life is a preparation for death from a Gnostic point of view. And the key that's used in the Gnostic teachings, because we don't have the technology and the means by which to utilize that technology, because you have to understand the technology of these ancient times was founded upon consciousness. The way that the pyramids were built and all these elements, there was an integration, an intimate integration, consciousness with matter, which we don't have that anymore. So we have to work in ways that are appropriate for these times. And the process of this is we call the process of initiation. Initiation is a series of living and dying or facing the relationship of life and death, but in connection with the divinity or the being. Fusing ourselves as much as we can with their inner divinity to guide us through this process. Because there's always been guides through the process. And so let's talk a bit about this King Sisyphus and these sacred scriptures, these mythologies that are founded on the teachings of the soul and the divine natures, and that the gods in one way are entities, yes, but the most important way, they're parts of our own consciousness. So if there's 49 regions, subconscious regions, they have an aspect that is in the superior consciousness too. And there's parts of our being, which the tree of life helped to illustrate for us, that there is a Morpheus that's part of our consciousness. There is a Thanatos. There is a Hypnos. There is a Zeus. There is a Jehovah. There is a Mother Mary. All of these are parts of our own consciousness.
And these titles and names are, like we were talking about earlier, the symbology. A title or a name gives it form so that we can relate with it, but it represents something that in a way is formless inside of us, part of our consciousness.
And so these mythologies, again, ology, logos, and mythos, mystery, the understanding of these two things are the stories of parts of our own psyche to help us to understand how to relate in this physical world and to awaken. So Sisyphus was said that he cheated, or he what's the word? He betrayed Zeus in a sense, and he told somebody something. I'm not going to get into all the details, but he told somebody something about Zeus, and Zeus got upset. And so Zeus sends Thanatos, death, to take Sisyphus into the underworld and kill him, take him as his death. That's part of what Thanatos was. And so he takes Sisyphus down into the underworld, and he's going to chain him to this stone for eternity. And a very interesting thing happens. A very interesting happened on the way to death. That Sisyphus, this wise individual, sort of a trickster who really wants to continue material existence, says to Thanatos, hey, death, we'll just use the word death, isn't it interesting that you're here doing this? Shouldn't it be Hermes, who is considered Hermes psychopomp? And the name psychopomp means the psyche, soul, is the one that conveys, there's a word I'm forgetting right now, carries, let's just say carries the soul through the underworld. No, he's not the farrier, but he carries the soul. It's an E word. I'm drawing a blank. But anyway, if I had notes, I'd be able to pull it up. But anyway, just Google psychopomp. It'll tell you what it is. But Hermes, as psychopomp, normally takes the souls through the underworld. So Sisyphus says, hey, why are you doing it? And so he kind of confuses death for a moment. And Sisyphus then chains him to the stone. He kills death with death, and he leaves. Now, very interestingly, part of the teachings of the Gnostic tradition is understanding that Hermes, Mercury, is a part of our internal being that helps us to descend into the underworld and return. It's a deep, profound teaching that we cannot give at this moment, but it's a wonderful, wonderful, and it's the essence of the Gnostic teachings. So he's gone, and as we do things in the world, it throws things into chaos, because what happened? Death is locked up. So that means nothing's dying. People are sick, and they're aging, and they're suffering, and they can't die. They just go on and on and on. And then it gets kind of crazy, because Ares, the god of war, or Mars in the Roman tradition, or in the Hebrew tradition, Samael, who's associated with the angel of death. He's not really the angel of death. It's really a warrior, as we know in Mars and Ares. And in the Greek story, Ares is like, whoa, this is not good. I'm out there killing and killing and killing on the battlefield, and nobody's dying. It kind of took all the joy out of it for him. So he goes to Zeus and says, hey, we got to do something about this. So Zeus sends Ares down there and says, yeah, free him. We got free death. So he does. And now Zeus is like, well, wait a minute. I was trying to get Sisyphus. And they go through this whole process. And I'm going to cut to the chase. What you may know about Sisyphus, Zeus ties him to a rock psychologically. And it's said that he dies again. And the story of Sisyphus is he pushes this giant boulder up top of a hill eternally until it gets to the top, and then it goes over. And so you can imagine how this process is going, and strong, pushing, and heavy, and okay, I think I can do this. He's like, I've lived in the world. I've got skills. I can do this. You get the last push, and it goes off. He's got to go back down and get it again. Next time, it's like, okay, well, we're going to go a little slower as we get up here. And then he goes back. So he's spending eternity trying to do something that is impossible. And that's in essence what we're trying to do. We are Sisyphus, And this stone is our life, an attachment to comfort and pleasure that we're trying to find in this physical world, that we think we can get there, and we almost get there, and we have to start again. And the problem is that we're not conscious that we're Sisyphus, that we're pushing boulders up mountains. And one of the amazing elements of the Gnostic teachings is an understanding of the science. What was that? I forgot what slide was next. A consequence, understanding the science of creation itself, not just from the point of view of understanding how creation exists outside, but understanding how creation works inside of ourselves, so that we can create something permanent, founded in the soul, that is completely interconnected with the joy and the purpose of its life itself. We have to do this by negating, in some way, seeking comfort in the physical world, meaning, as somehow tells us, the three factors: birth, awakening, death, removing the things that keep us asleep, and sacrifice. Sacrificing my attachment to a certain level of comfort in this physical world, not just to become masochists, but to understand that the soul really has the life and the joy that we need. And we have to understand that there's a consequence of not aligning ourselves with the way the earth operates. And as we know, this earth is a closed system. And you've probably heard this term, the 1%, this idea of the 1%, that 1% of the world's population controls over 50% of the wealth. Well, that has directly relationship to desire and matter, and that we live in a closed system, so that there is a direct relationship to others, some having a lot and others having less. There's always going to be a byproduct of that relationship. In Gnosis, and what I was going to have you remind me was, what do they say about the relationship of the essential self and the egoic structure? We're essentially 3% in normal state without an awakened consciousness, 3% free consciousness, and 97% conditioned. Essence, essential nature, or consciousness conditioned to repeat, to find, to search outside of ourselves. 97%. And as we go on as humanity, as I said, that this physical world is a complication, we're at the end of a great cycle that's taking place, that matter has become so complicated and living has become so complicated that we have to understand that tree of life represents, and we're going to look at this in a future talk, a series of laws, those dimensions. The more dimensions there are, the freer reality expresses itself, because it's under fewer laws. The lower it is, the more laws it's under and subject to, and the more we try to control it through our own desire and ourself, we multiply and complicate those laws themselves. And so that's why, for instance, in big cities, and Vancouver is one of those cities, New York, LA, Toronto, Montreal, you go to any big city at this point in time, you feel the weight and the density of that environment. It's there, it's palpable. And question, does anybody find it difficult to do things this day and age? Like something simple like pay a bill, or try and dispute a charge, or get an update on your computer. Mm-hmm. Do you notice how complicated things get? That there's more and more laws psychologically, esoterically present, that this physical reality, especially in the big cities, are submerging into subconscious regions. We don't perceive it because we're identified with the physical nature. And there's a byproduct. There's a byproduct of that becomes in the world, different poverties and discomforts, because it directly related to our unconscious pursuit of pleasure and comfort. We're not aware of the impact that it has on parts of our consciousness and then reflects into the world. So whenever you go to a big city, and they say in a third world country, but it's in first world countries too, there is always a byproduct of poverty and disease and sickness that's around. And part of it's fueled very directly now with drugs and drug addiction, which is the extreme drive towards comfort and pleasure in the physical world through sensations. And also, even our pursuit of spirituality has become part of using marijuana, drinking, mushrooms, microdosing, and the other elements. And one of the main elements that's really got hold of society at this time, and it's so extremely addictive, is opium products, opioids. It's very interesting that at the beginning, the opium, the poppy, was used to help to awaken consciousness, and now it's become an adverse element. That drugs, on the whole, that there is between 18 and 79, I think, we'll just say adults, that in North America, over 60% have had or have a prescription for a drug at this point, and then something like 20 to 30% have more than one prescription. And the older you get, the more that goes up. It has become a part of life. The Gnostic teachings, as we know it, they communicated this way back in the last century. Samael was teaching this, that this relationship of materiality, materialism, and spirituality, and the fusing of drugs into the culture that began as a way to drop in, drop out, tune in, drop out, now has become a way of life. And that it's like 81% in the United States of people that are have vaccines, meaning that we're giving you this drug so that you can live. That's the idea, so that you can live, or that you can live better. We have drugs and birth control to control production of life. We're using all these exterior things as extensions to give us the life that we feel we need to have peace, but we'll never have that peace because we're relying it on something outside of us. And that the drugs are extremely addictive. And the problem is not as much the drugs, it is, but it's the psychology of addiction and accumulation that we have inside of ourselves, because we've taken every sacred plant and inverted it and become addicted to it in one way or another. And it's because we're addicted to the sensation of life and fear of death. But many times the relationship of opium, and they had it back in the last century, the opium dens, where people would go and to escape life and have this extreme joyful sensation that takes them into their own 49 subconscious regions.
But without consciousness.
But without consciousness. And so they just go in there and they suffer and they suffer and they suffer. And now, with what we call the opioid crisis or epidemic, it has become part of the byproduct of civilization itself. And now, with 3% consciousness, we can do very little towards separating that. But as the mathematics and the complication of matter continues, we're going to have on the whole, on the majority, less and less free consciousness. And there's going to become a point where that 1%, like in physical wealth, becomes only the inverse relationship of 1% of consciousness, and then all hope is lost. All hope is lost for this humanity. But
we'll become too unconscious.
We'll become too unconscious to be able to do anything about it. But we should be able to look at the world as it is now and realize that we've been trying to make a better world since there's been a world. And I would argue that I don't think we've done a very good job at it, because we say things like we've eradicated smallpox or these diseases, but we have not removed disease. And as long as we're working solely in the physical world, the causes of the diseases, the causes of the difficulties are just moving around and complicating and manifesting again, so that we've got more and more incurable diseases, more and more pandemics are going to come, unfortunately, because we're not working inside of the psyche. We're dealing completely with the outside, and our science is completely attached to the exterior life, and then it's going to produce salvation. The next wave of salvation for humanity is artificial intelligence, and it's all over the world, all over the commercials. Every company that is a company is propagating, we're powered by artificial intelligence. You'll see it in the commercials and the way that they explain, and they communicated it that you're going to make you a better person. The last one I just saw is for iPhone, and this iPhone intelligence where it has this slacker guy. He's out there and he just says such and such. He made a word up, and then he pushed a button and it made a professionally written response to his boss, and his boss looks at it and looks over like, there's no way you did that. And he's all like, yeah, I did. It's insane that what we're doing and how we think that this is going to make us better people, that we're going to be better by doing something outside of ourselves and not transforming inside of ourselves. And the reason that there is these byproducts in humanity is because these byproducts are in the psyche of each and every one of us. We are all responsible for this. And as much charity as we would like to give is not going to solve the problem. We give, that's great. We vote for the people we feel we need to vote for. But we have to work psychologically the relationship of depth and sleep. Why we go into this underworld every night is because these parts of our psyche come alive. And when we're not tied to the physical sensations, we're going through this either consciously in our dreams or in memories of our dreams, or as science tells us, parts of deep, deep sleep where we're so deep in our consciousness, consciousness, but our subconsciousness, sub-regions of our consciousness, that it doesn't even register in the brain. But the soul is there, and we are experiencing it. And as we begin to awaken our consciousness, it's not just going to be about butterflies and rainbows, and we're going to have the beautiful, best day ever manifesting and living our abundance. No, we're going to awaken, and as we awaken, we're going to see things inside of ourselves that need to be eliminated and liberated. And we can verify, and why the teachers of prior taught the need to awaken, to free, to liberate from death, because that death, those psychological components are there waiting for us, and we can't wait till we have the opportunity to experience them when we can't do anything about it. We need a teaching and a practical means to go in there and free these parts of our consciousness. But first, we have to realize that they're there. Know yourself and you will know the universe in its gods. Well, the first elements we're going to find inside of ourselves are not the universe and the gods. We say things like, oh, I'm a spiritual being, and I'm an inhabitant of the universe, but we're not. We live in a closed system. This planet Earth is completely, what's going on? There it is. A closed system. We have the same water, the same air, the same matter for millions and billions of years. And if this Earth had a means to get rid of that, we would all die. The Earth is living in this closed system and transforming and transmuting this matter and energy for billions of years. The problem is that we don't do that inside of ourselves. We're leaving parts of ourselves in the sub-regions of this planet and the psychological space that's keeping us tied to this system until we free it, until we align ourselves with the way that the planet is meant to operate. But we do that because we can do that by understanding it inside of ourselves and liberate ourselves psychologically from this circumstance. And the stories of Osiris that would spend 12 hours on his solar bark going through the day and then 12 hours in the night. And he would be born again. That's to tell us that the solar deity, Ra, represents our Christ, our inner Christ, and the expression of the divine intelligence of our being that goes into these regions. And so if we can awaken and be part of that process, we can free ourselves. And as he goes into the night, which is into the underworld, which is into the world of death, he brings with it the light. And he's combated by this Apophis, this great serpent that tries to devour him. And the serpent's role is to stop the movement of Ra through the underworld and eventually to swallow Ra and the sun. And when that happens, which is when the percentage of consciousness is no longer possible to overcome anything in the underworld, then there won't be a new day, that the civilization will come to an end. And we can see, hopefully, if we perceive that this is taking place in the world around us, we're seeing that parts of the world are going down and getting lost. So I think that's where we'll end. It's a sad ending, but there is hope. There is hope. There is a teaching and there is a path to liberation from this. And that the masters have come throughout eternity again and again in different times in different places. And right now, this Gnostic teaching is one of the forces that have a complete teaching for the liberation and the awakening of the consciousness and the psychological death of all of the elements that keep us tied to this underworld. So, Halloween. You told me to tie it together.
Right.
Did I do? Did it? Halloween. But if this interests you, if one thing touched you and communicated something to you and inspired you to think, to look, to be awake, and you're interested, then go to the correspondence group. We'll be in touch. We have possibilities to continue teaching. And